Remember this pergola we just built? Now we're going to install a deck.
Starting with a main beam around the outside, some joists, and then the deck itself on top. And then at the end, we're going to be installing some lights.
But before we start, I'm going to let you guys at home know what timber we're using in today's project. So we're using some 6x2 C24 for the frame, and for the top, we're using 120mm by 30mm decking board.
First job is to get this main beam wrapped around these posts. So I'm going to start on the front, and then on the highest part of the ground, which is here, I'm just going to lift that up so it's slightly off the floor because we don't want it on the floor. And then I'm using some framing nails just to hold it in place temporarily. And then I'm going to put my level on and work my way across these posts. And now that we've got that plate level, I have overrun the end, so I'm just going to grab a handsaw, cut that flush with this post. Wow, what a good throw.
So I got on with cutting off the ends of our main beam. So sometimes it is good just to get out the old hand tools. So we moved around to the next one, remembering all we're doing is leveling them up, making sure they all follow suit. And then I'm just chucking in those 90mm framing nails. The reason I use the nails before putting our final fixings in is because it's easier and I haven't got to hold it still for as long. I can just quickly nail it and then we'll go back and add in these timber locks. So they're 150mm timber lock screws. They're an actual structural screw, so a lot stronger than the nails, and that's what's going to hold it when you start adding all that weight on top for your little parties that you're going to be having on it.
Now it's time to move on, that wasn't planned, to install some weed suppressant, and all that does is to stop any weeds coming up and ruining your deck.
This is going to be one of the easiest jobs you're going to be doing when building your deck. You literally just roll it out, unfold it, and then you need to pin it down because the wind will blow it. So we used some old tent pegs and we just pushed them into the ground, and it just stops it from moving. And if it's a bit too big, you can just overlap it like we did.
That is the weed membrane all pinned down. We've been caught out by it before, we've laid it out, and then a gust of wind. So that's why we pin it down. Now it's time to move on to our rafters. Joists. These are the rafters that we are going to be installing on this deck. So how we're going to do that, we're going to take the measurement from the back plate to the front plate and cut these all down, but we're not actually going to be screwing these.
Me and Brad then get on with measuring out for the length that we need. So you may want to check in a few places just to make sure everything is square. Ours was, so we got on with cutting our joists, not rafters, Brad, back down to length. You could do this one at a time, so cut one, install one, but I always find it easier to batch cut. So we cut every single one that we need using the 400 centers. So we just worked out exactly how many we needed and cut them all down to size.
That's them all cut down to size. So next job, we need to be installing hangers. So we're not using screws, we're using hangers. But before we put that on, we need to look down our pieces and find where the crown is. So most timber's got a bow in it. So if we look down this one, this is fairly straight to be honest, but that's got a slight curve in it. So that means that this plate here we want at the bottom and the curve at the top. So we take our hanger, we slide it over, backwards like an idiot, like so, and we want this flush with the edge. And then to install these, we use a special nail called a twist nail. So if you come here, you'll see that that has got a twist in it. It just stops them coming back out. So all we need to do is fill all the nail holes, and then we can get ready to slide these in.
We have to fill in every single hole with those twist nails. Now there is something called a PPN gun. We do actually own one, but we couldn't get any nails in time, and for how much we had to do, it just made sense to nail them in. So we got some twist nails and nailed them all in by hand, and you can do the same. Just keeping track of those crowns and making sure they're all in the same direction.
So Phil has prepped all the joists and now it's time to start installing them. Oh, we've got to go.
So if you slot it in like that, get it in. And then we're just going to sit that like that.
What I was just explaining to Brad there is the spacing for our joists. So you can measure and mark these out with a pencil. I've done it before, but this time I wanted to try using some spacers. So if you want 400 centres on your timbers, if you cut some 355mm blocks, that will give you exactly 400 from centre to centre. So that's what we did. The only thing we did have to do is modify some of the spacings. So remember, if something's in your way, like here you can see there's a post, you can make the space smaller. You just don't want to go any larger. So we shortened any spacings where we couldn't quite get to that beam, and then we just went straight back to our 400 spacings.
So that is all of our joists nailed into position. We now need to move on to nailing our hangers up, which actually will take most of the brunt of the weight. But before I do, I want to quickly show you why we use twist nails and what they actually do. So look, if I just put a pencil mark across the top, hopefully you can see that little line, and I'll show you what happens when you hammer in. So that is obviously straight to you now, and every time I hit it, and you see that line twist, and that's going to prevent that from pulling straight out because it now needs to rotate. So that's why they use them, because they're a lot more stuck. Is that a proper phrase? They're a lot more stuck.
That's not a word.
Let's move on.
After realising my vocabulary isn't as good as I thought it was, we got on with nailing off those hangers. So we're filling in every hole just like we did when we installed them on the joists. But you will notice we've not bent the tops over. So you can bend the tops over, but because this is a deck, we don't want any bits sticking up where we're putting some decking. So Brad followed up, just cutting those tops off with an angle grinder.
That is the joist all in. Now we're going to put a big centre line all the way through, and we're going to be installing some noggins or blocking, or if you're from Scotland, dwangs. So to do that, I'm just going to measure on each end to the centre, like so. And then to mark it, now that we've got our two end lines, we just use a chalk line, which is literally a piece of string with chalk on it. So we hook it one end, go to the other, and then twang, like this. And just remember, all of our tools are always linked in the description. So if you want to grab one of these or any of the other tools, they're all below.
So with our line in place, we can start running in our noggins, blocking, or dwangs, whatever you may know them as. So this is a bit of an age-old argument, running them straight or staggering them. For me personally, I like to run my noggins in straight, mainly because of the visual look, but people like to stagger them. There's nothing wrong with that. Both work fine. So you do whatever makes you feel happy. I run them in straight, and the way I do that is to slide it in position, nail through the one end I can get to, and then I spike at an angle from the back on the previous noggin. Some of these noggins obviously we had to short because we closed some of those spaces up like I mentioned earlier, and that was it. Then it was time to move on to some additional blocking around our posts. So because the planks are going to be ending up on nothing where our posts are, you need to make sure there's something for them to sit on. So we just chucked in some little pieces of blocking on all of the posts. I believe there was around 7 or 8 on ours, not too many, and we just nailed these in. That's enough. We're only picking up the ends of the balls. Once those were in, we had some little extra pieces on the ends as well to put in. That's because we're having a border on this, and we need somewhere for the ends and the border to sit. So again, just nailed them in, and that was enough. Those 90mm nails will hold that just fine. Once those are all in, we can start looking at our decking.
So now it's time to screw the face all around the edge, and we're using decking screws. Now these are specially designed for decking so they don't go rusty and ruin your wood. So what we're going to do is we're going to get it flush with the back, we're going to overrun it, and then we're just going to cut it off with a handsaw, and we're going to put 2 fixings every 300 so. Phil?
Yeah, sure.
About right.
Brad then gets on with fixing in that face plate. Remembering we want it flush with the sides, but we also want it flush with the top, because that's going to be helping when we put on our boulder. So that's actually going to help hold that boulder in place. So with these screws, you just need to sink them just below the surface, and then we can cut that off nice and flush using a handsaw again. If you want to use a power tool, you can, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it's just easier to get the old school hand tools out and whip it off.
So it looks like it's down to me to do the decking tape to protect the wood.
What decking tape is a protective layer that covers over our frame, because the first thing to rot on a deck is the frame itself, and this is actually waterproof, but it allows air through. So again, everything's listed if you want to have a look at this stuff. So we're going to get on with covering the whole top of our frame. So while Mike is installing the deck tape, I just want to cover why we installed the front before we taped our frame up, and that is because if you come here, you see this gap where we've fixed them together, that is going to be prone to getting water trapped in between the timbers and rotting. So now if you look over here, this tape has now bridged that gap, so no water will be getting in between the two and rotting them out.
We let Mike get on with taping the decking frame before realising he just wasn't very good at it and it was going to take him all year. So we all jumped in and started taping the deck up together. This stuff's quite easy to use, so the way I've always done it is to stick it to one side, pull it all the way out, cut your length off, and then go back and remove the protective layer and stick it in position.
That is the frame protected. Now it's time to install some deck boards.
The method I use when doing a boulder is to install my boulder first. Some people install the main of the deck and then cut the boulder in, but you know, it doesn't matter, either works, whatever you feel more comfortable with. And just remember, when we're marking around objects like our posts, we need to make sure we're leaving a space. So I use my speed square and a 5mm packer to allow a little gap around them posts. So we cut those out first using a jigsaw. The reason we do that is if we cut our miters, it's going to be in the wrong position because the ball's going to be moving further back. So once we cut around a post, we mark off our 45-degree mitre. I'm using a circular saw for this one, but if you want, you can use a chop saw. Sometimes it's easier to set your chop saw up, but for how many cuts we had, it was quicker for us just to use the skill saw. But again, there's no right or wrong, you can use either. And then once you've got all of your miters cut and you've made sure they line up properly, you can get them all set into position and make sure you've still got that 5mm gap around your posts, like I have here. To fix them down, we're face fixing these. What I mean by face fixing is literally to screw straight through the top, because we're not installing the rest of the deck in the same method. I thought it would make sense for me to mention that. And the screw positions I use is to use the joists themselves. So that sets out our screw positions, run them all the way through and make sure that that top piece is fully secure before running in our first run of decking. But we will be taking a break after that first run because there's a little extra job we need to get done.
The boulder is completely screwed down and we've got our first row in between our posts. So we are having deck lights, which are these, and they're going to be sitting in the front of this pergola here. If you are going to be installing anything like this, you need to think about it as you go, because obviously you won't have access underneath after. So we're going to get these drilled and fixed, and then we're going to move on with laying the rest.
When it comes to layout of your lights, you need to think about a few things. So for us, we need to avoid the joists below, because if you hit one, your light's not going to fit. And also what it's going to look like visually. So we actually spaced the two large openings differently to the main entrance in the middle. So we had 3 on the left, 3 on the right, and then we had 2 in the middle as you walk in, making sure that every single one is going to avoid those joists underneath. And then to drill our holes, we just used a Fosner bit, but you can use a spade bit, whatever size your lights recommend. And these particular ones are a friction fit. So if you're a caveman like me, you could just use your hand to smash them in before getting to the last couple and realizing that your hand is really hurting now, and picking up a rubber mallet and doing it properly. Once they're in, we need to stake in our solar panel, because these are not mains powered, making sure that's going to be facing the sun during the day. And then you could just connect all of our waterproof connections, making sure to install the blanking plug on your last light to stop any water or moisture getting into your lights. And that's that job done.
Now that we're installing the actual top of the deck boards, we're actually using Trend's secret hidden screw system. So basically, Phil can show you a little rundown. If you go around that way, this system actually gives you the spacing and it puts the screws in all at once. So this is the first time we're using it, and we're actually enjoying it.
So you clamp this onto your board, you can change for the thicknesses, so all different widths of board. And then you slide yourself 2 of the little fixings, so you need these fixings. And then using the bit that comes in the side of the tool, you just send it until it slips. And then what it's done is it's put 2 fixings in the very corners, and as this weathers, they will completely disappear. Lovely.
Now that we've demoed that tool, we can get on with installing the rest of our decking. So remember, if you don't want to use the concealed fixings, you don't have to. You can face fix the decking. I have no personal preference. We wanted to give this a try, and to be fair, it leaves quite a clean look on the top. And like everything, it always comes down to personal preference. So you can do either.
I also want to do a massive shout out to MGM Building Merchants for supplying these materials in this video. If you guys are looking for any building materials in the Essex or London surrounding areas, give them guys a shout. Links in the description below.
Another thing we did slightly different on this that I don't normally do is to do a random stagger on our joints. So normally I have 2 joints that run parallel through the boards, but Brad wanted to try out some random cuts and I think it looked quite nice. So we did random using our offcuts to start the next row, and the end result, I think it looked really nice.
It is the next day. We tried to complete it last night, but it got a bit too late, and I felt a little bit sorry for the neighbours. The skill saw is not the quietest tool in the world, but I do want to quickly cover one thing, and that is what way we are putting the decking up. So in the UK, it's quite popular to have grooves on both sides, so you can put it either, but this is a smooth deck, so we need to make sure these grooves sit underneath. Reason being is it allows water to get out from underneath the deck and stops rot. And another thing is it's going to allow some airflow to help dry this out when it gets wet. Now that the sun's out, let's get the rest of this screwed in. Right, a little problem that you might come across all too often, to be honest, is this, a little bow. See where the timber needs to be pulled back. This one's not too bad, I can do it with my leg, but I'm going to show you a little tip for some of them that are very stiff and you can't push them back. If you get yourself a scrap of timber like this, put yourself a little screw in there, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to screw it to one of the little joists, like this, leave that there, and then we'll get our screws set up ready to go. And now you don't need any help, you can just sort of pull this in, and it's super easy. You can just manipulate it yourself, pull our space in tight, and then we'll just get one of the screws done up. You can drop that out of the way, get a last screw in, and that's a way you can pull your boards around by yourself, because 1 is the happiest number, not the loneliest.
Another thing that we've not quite caught on camera is every 3 or 4 rows we're actually pulling a string line and checking that the boards are still running straight. So with natural products you get variations in thickness, and it's very easy to wander off and end up with a bowed deck. So that's just another thing to keep in mind.
On our last couple of boards, we've got to do some cuts. So we've got to cut around this post, and we've also got to cut the strip that sits just in front of it. So I'm going to show you a little tip I do. So I use my speed square, because we want a 5mm expansion around everything. I just sit that against the post and then bring that up so it touches like that. So when we mark the side, we're actually 5mm back. So now we've got our 5mm. So I do that both sides. And then to mark for the little cut we need here, if you take a scrap of the deck you're using and your packer, if you sit that like that, what that gives you is the amount you need to cut plus 5mm. So now we've got our expansion all built in. So we've cut that out, and we'll do the same on that, and then I'll show you if I've messed it up or not.
We get the jigsaw out and we cut out our little slots for our posts. Now we had to remove quite a lot of this board, so make sure you're careful as you're moving these sort of things in. And of course it fit perfectly, and then we just added in our last little pieces. And if you followed all the tips with the string line, they should be parallel. So these were just some 20mm strips. And then we can move on to the final job of this deck, and that is to scribe in the front piece. So because the ground in front of the deck isn't level, we need to scribe it. So we fix it to the one above, and then using a scrap and that 5mm packer method again, we just pencil along the front, follow it with a jigsaw in super fast speed before putting it in, and that way it follows the contour of the ground and just covers any gaps.
That's it, the deck is complete. Don't forget to go and check out our pergola build.
Love you back.
And he's gone again.